Hi, I'm Arielle Sewall, and I am here today with Dick DeAngelis, director-producer of the Fairfield History Series. We have the opportunity to interview him and find out about his early life and a little bit about the movies and the stories involved. So tell me about your early life. Where were you born?
I was born in Florham Park, New Jersey, north central New Jersey. And I lived there, grew up there, went to school there, and then for a year of college at Northeastern University in Boston. That's where I learned transcendental meditation. And from there, the week after I learned, I heard that there was a university that had started up in Fairfield, Iowa. And so I said, well, tell me about it. And they said, everyone there meditates, even like the janitors. I said, well, I want to go there because I had learned, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really different. And so I moved to Fairfield and pretty much have been here ever since. That was 1975.
A lot of people may remember the Italian Street Festival. I heard you had something to do with that.
Yeah, well, I got involved, I think for many people, you live like almost different lives. And when I first moved here, my wife and I, we had our 5 children, my wife Karen, and we graduated at MIU in '79, and then actually the day afterwards got married at Barhide Chapel. Went from there and went to New Jersey for a couple of years, but really missed Fairfield. So we came back. I was involved in business as a senior vice president of sales and marketing for several firms. And then I had my own firm in marketing for about 20 years, DeAngelis Management Services. And from there, had lots of successes and plenty of failures too, but I had a lot of fun and met a lot of good people. I pretty much was done. But as I continued doing my own thing, I was able to have some spare time, and I formed a group called SOFIA, which is the Society of Fairfield Italian Americans. And we decided to host the All Things Italian Street Festival for a year. It ended up being for 10 years, with about 3,000 to 5,000 people coming every year for one night for a big Italian festival. It was very popular, and I had a lot of fun with it. At some point, I said, okay, I'm done. It was exhausting. It had grown bigger and bigger and bigger. Not only that, but we had to deal with the fact that sometimes it would pour rain, and then we had to have our backup sites and all that. So that was it. We decided I can hang that up, maybe retire. I was at age 60.
So from there, how did you come up with the idea of the Fairfield History Series?
I think I was watching a YouTube video, and it was about my town in New Jersey that I was from. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Somebody did like a little drone shot, And then I remember that big library, and they said, oh, that was donated by Rockefeller or something. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. And for at least 5 minutes, it kept my interest. Unfortunately, it was a 20-minute video. So I'm like, I realize why I'm bored by documentary things, because it was a boring person telling me in a boring way. But I kind of got hooked on the idea that, wouldn't it be cool if somebody did an interesting one of these about Fairfield? And so that was the beginning idea. And from there, we came up with, I bounce these things off my wife all the time. She goes, okay, yeah, good luck. And then, but she comes up with an idea or two. Back and forth we went. Finally, I told her, I think I need to do the movie myself. She goes, you don't know how to do movies. I said, I know, but we got really talented people. We'll ask them to help. And I said, and I got some friends that can help me with some research maybe. And I know a lot of people. And I said, we'll figure it out. And then all of a sudden I said, I don't think it's just one movie. We're going to have to do and eventually I came up with 8 films that would depict the whole history of Fairfield. I think as I got more into it, I realized that people don't know much in the world today about their hometown, about where they live, about their own mini eco-environment, if you will. Not only ecologically, but the economy of the environment, the geography in the environment, and who lived here before us. I like to say, sometimes I sit in my backyard at the fire pit and I have a friend or two over. Maybe they're playing some music on a guitar or something like that. Maybe we're even having something to drink, a glass of wine or whatever. And all of a sudden I realize, you know what? Look at the sky. It's like amazing. Look at the stars. And then I realized, I bet you there were people here before us that were thinking the same thing. And that's when I figured that out and I said, who were those people? What language did they speak? Did they have friends that they would talk to like this? And if so, isn't that kind of strange that maybe 1,000 years ago, somebody was sitting in the same place or nearby? I found out later that there's an actual whole field of study about this. It's called place-based education. And they feel like young people in particular are getting a lot of information about the world when they're young, but not about the environment they live in. Therefore, they're a little more disassociated and less and more disconnected from their world because everything's available, but they really don't relate to anything. When you go out in the backyard or into a pond and you start seeing the frogs and everything, there's a certain thing that happens to a child when they start understanding those things. When they pick up something and they see there's a Native American artifact, it connects them with the world in a different way. That's what these films are about. So we started doing research. And our research took us to books that have been written and other interesting things. Susan Fulton Welty, Joseph Fulton, there's Rory Goff wrote a book recently about local history, but there's not too many. I studied the ones that were there, available, and whatever was available on the internet. But I realized that most kids aren't reading these books. Susan Fulton Welty wrote A Fairfield, a fabulous book if you want to know about certain parts of history. But it's a little boring in today's world, She's a little detail-oriented. And I'm sorry, Susan, because I consider her a patron saint of our Fairfield History series. The reason why our organization's called Fairfield Productions is because she wrote the book A Fairfield, and we wanted to give a nod to her.
So it sounds like that was one of your main goals, was the connecting the younger generations, especially and every generation to where they live, actually locally.
I was shocked how many people really got into it once we showed them what was going on. They were like, wow, and adults too, and even some of the older people. So I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. We've struck a nerve. And I think when we decided to go with the first film, we decided to make use of both the book knowledge, but also the thing that we could do that the books couldn't do as well, is we could take an interview with someone who has a knowledge. Oh, my daddy did this, my grandpa did this. And all of a sudden you start to get knowledge, or I know a lot about this area. And now all of a sudden we found firsthand knowledge about things that we didn't even know there were experts in this area. Certainly kids aren't exposed to this, and adults either. So we started to actually be able to work with not only the organizations in town, like the Fairfield Public Library. The Carnegie Museum is just fabulous for this kind of information and knowledge. Marsden Barnes, these are really iconic places, even places outside of it, but like the State Museum in Des Moines. We work with Leo Landis, the state curator there. We work in Iowa City with John Dorshuk, who's the state archaeologist office. He runs that. There's, I don't know, 20 plus archaeologists who are doing research. We went one day and all we did was find everything they had on finds in Jefferson County, brought it out on a table and looked through it all. What did you find when? And they had even said, we haven't looked at this. Many of us have been here over 20 years and we've never seen this. It's been that long, so it's kind of cool. Plus, we started working with local people. I found out that the people who did this research, one of them was named Anton Till. Well, we just tracked down Anton in Ottumwa, Iowa, and Anton ended up being a fabulous resource for us. When we did our first film, Life Before Fairfield, that kind of woke everybody up and started building all these connections. Because I wanted to know, well, okay, let's go way back and find out, how did this land get created? How did the rivers and streams get formed? And so that's what we talked about. And then I wanted to know, okay, once we know that, we worked with the archaeologists and so on. Then I said, were there dinosaurs here? Because there wasn't much information about dinosaurs. So we tracked down a guy named Dr. Robert Bacher, and he was used as an expert in the movie Jurassic Park, like their top expert. That's how amazing this guy is. And when I called him, I said, let's go to the top and find out who the U.S. expert is on dinosaurs. Well, I track him down and leave a message finally on his personal phone machine. And I couldn't believe it, but on a Sunday afternoon, I get a call back and he goes, this is Dr. Robert Bacher. You left me an interesting message about doing a movie about your hometown and whether there were dinosaurs. I said, yes. He goes, I'm curious about this project. And he ended up doing an interview with us where I sent my daughter Laura and a few people with her, and they actually did an interview in Denver, outside of Denver, in Morrison, Colorado. And it was just fabulous. He really answered some of the questions that nobody here knew, nobody in the state knew, but Bob Bacher knew.
So now that we've talked a little bit about Life Before Fairfield and Dr. Robert Bacher, and starting at the beginning, is there anything else? Are there any other stories that stick out in your mind from that movie?
Yeah, well, I told you a little about Anton Till, how we interviewed him right on one of the creeks in Jefferson County near where Native American artifacts had been found. And then here's one that I'll tell you. This is a really interesting, because when you do these films, how do you make them interesting? Well, one way you make them interesting is you do interesting interviews and you do deep research so you know what to share, and you fill in the interviews. In between the interviews is narration where you can tell people a little more of certain facts. So we did really deep research. And then the other thing you do is you have to get pictures and movies and so on. So we actually, with the help of our director of photography, Jason Strong, and our drone specialist at that time, Renee Holmberg, we started taking some amazing shots of the landscape of Jefferson County. Because we didn't want just Fairfield, we wanted the entire county. And I found out so much about how different parts of Jefferson County were. And but one thing I was having trouble with is I was telling part of the story about the last ice age in Iowa and how the rivers and creeks got created was when the ice melted off of that huge ice mass up a little north of Des Moines, right? So I'm like, how do I tell that? I don't have any, and any pictures I've ever seen of what they call a calving event, where the ice kind of shears off of a big glacier. Well, usually that's from, something up in, the Arctic areas. And it ends up being going into a big ocean or into a huge, well, I didn't want that because what happened here is it went into almost like a little river. Well, I finally found what I wanted on the internet, but now you have to get permission to use it. So it was probably 10:30 or so at night, I'm still finding out who was it that did this particular, and I found out the name of this scientist who had done the picture taking and caught that beautiful shot. And right before I went to bed, I wrote him, and before I turned off the computer, he wrote me back and said, yes, I took that here and it is unique. And I'm like, yes, can I use it for my film? Blah, 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 blah. And it's going to be a film about, our the hometown and how it got formed and da, da, da. And he said, this sounds very curious. How much are you willing to pay me? And I'm like, uh-oh. I didn't want to tell him nothing. So we've been raising all the money from local donations. We had a nonprofit we formed. So I said, $50, thinking really boldly, And he wrote back almost with a laughing, And he goes, okay, well, this is worth a lot more than that, but how did you get my name? And I told him, and he says, it's so interesting. I'm about to leave for months on this excursion, and you wouldn't be able to get a hold of me. And tonight, I'm just cleaning up a few things and happened to see your email. And I said, I don't know if people believe in divine providence or whatever, but I did feel like God or nature or whatever was on my side in this project. And once you feel that, you feel like you have 100 people with you. We had a few, but not 100 yet. Anyway, he gave me permission. I wrote him back and said, by the way, do you have that in a high-res file? And he wrote back and goes, picky. And he goes, yes, I do. I'll give you the link. And you'll see that shot is in the film, and just a beautiful shot. This is how we put together Life Before Fairfield, just one kind of an example. Fun stuff.
I know you worked with the National Tribal Preservation Officers of a few different tribes.
Right. Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, THPOs, of the two major tribes that were here. But Life Before Fairfield had the early stuff, but then the second half of the film is mostly about the Native Americans that were here before the Europeans got here, right? And we worked with Jonathan Buffalo from the Meskwaki tribe and a guy named Lance Foster from the Iowa tribe that had been here much longer than the Meskwaki tribe. I didn't know much about the Iowa tribe. I knew little about the Meskwaki. We interviewed both of them for quite a while, learned about their language, their customs, much more than we could actually put in the film. But it gave me a really interesting angle into Native American life here and what was going on, not only in Iowa, but in particular in and around Fairfield. So since then, I have stayed in touch with the Meskwaki a little, but I'm still very close friends with Lance Foster from the Iowa tribe. And he has been a huge resource for us in a number of films.
So Heroes was your next film.
Yeah, before you go into Heroes, I was just thinking about it. I want to tell people a little bit of how excited I was when we premiered Life Before Fairfield. Because when I premiered it, I remember at that time Rustin Lippincott was running the show at the Fairfield Conventions and Visitors Bureau and at the Sondheim Theater. And I told him I wanted to take 2 nights to show this film. And he says, D, listen, I love you, man, but this is a history film. If you get a couple people, 100 people, I'd be really happy. I said, I think we're going to sell out. It must have seemed like such a dreamer to him. But he knew that I had done the All Things Italian Festival, and it was extremely successful. So he set aside Friday and Saturday, even though he was warning me that don't be disappointed. Well, the first night we sold out. So it was free because of all the contributions locally. We could just offer it for free. We had to turn away 50 people. It fit 525 people. It was packed, not an empty seat in the place. And then the next night, we figured, well, maybe word will spread because people seem to enjoy it. We had a big standing ovation. We talked and answered questions afterward. Lance Foster and John Dorshuk came up with me and Jason. It was fun. It was really fun. And people, how did you have this idea? And I couldn't take notes fast enough. And I said, well, you can come back. Well, the next night it was packed again. We still had to turn back people. Rustin said, I'll give you Sunday afternoon. Maybe some more people come. Another 450 came on Sunday afternoon. We had about 1,500 people come just for the first weekend of seeing the first movie. And that's what told me that we were on to a good idea. And the people were really hungry for this. People would come up to me and say, I'm not looking at this area the same anymore. I can actually almost see the buffalo that used to roam in this area as I go west of town towards Ottumwa. I said, yeah, it's pretty amazing. It changes your perspective. And so then we decided, okay, what's next? Well, I wanted to do a movie about people more. That one was more about the place. So this was called Heroes of Fairfield. And we decided to kind of embark in that.
So when it came to heroes, how did you go about defining what a hero means?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like, I think, my biggest concern was my idea of a hero was going to be different than my people who watched the film, and they were going to not like it because it wasn't the same as theirs. So I enlisted the help of Jonathan Andelson, a professor from Grinnell College, who was an expert in this area. And he actually helped me think it out. We would send emails back and forth. We'd talk on the phone. I'd say, I don't know, Mickey Mantle was my hero. And he goes, yeah, well, Mickey Mantle, he'd write back, said, is a hero, but you said that heroes also meant that they did something good for the community. I said, yeah. He goes, I might argue that Willie Mays was more of a hero than Mickey Mantle in some ways. I said, I get that, and that's how we would have a conversation back and forth. And finally, we came up with the idea, it's people who do great things, maybe go against the grain sometimes, in order for the best, not just for themselves, but they do it for the sake of others, for the community. Once we got that together, and we said, okay, well, I know myself, I feel like you can't talk about heroes unless you talk about soldiers that fight for our country and sometimes lay down their life for our freedoms. But I didn't want to just start the film that way. I wanted to start with a little bit of something unique. So we started the film with Robin Lim. Robin Lim is a woman that came to Fairfield through MIU and got inspired because of its mission of creating world peace and so on. She got inspired to do something to create a better world, a substantially better world. And in her area, it was she became a midwife, and she went to Bali, in Indonesia, and opened up a clinic there. Eventually, it's grown into a clinic that serves many different women in many areas in that part of the world. These are women who, when they would have their babies, if they couldn't afford to pay at the hospital would keep the baby until the father could come up with the money to pay. So he'd be working and working and working extra, then pay the hospital, and then they'd release the baby. Sometimes weeks later, the mother could come only for 20-minute periods twice a day in order to feed the baby. So that was unacceptable to Robin. She saw it as a huge injustice. And she wanted, and therefore women were having their babies in these huts and so on, and not a very good situation. So Robin developed a clinic, and we decided to tell her story. By the way, Robin was inspired right here in Fairfield, Iowa, and she was really adamant that that was the main thing that really kind of lifted her spirits and set her goals big. So I wanted to start with that, even though it was only a 5-minute story. By the way, Robin won the 2011, I think, CNN Hero of the Year. So Robin, she's a pretty big deal, and also someone I know and really cherish. I thought I'd start there. Then we talked about the soldiers and not just soldiers, but people who served in the military that were from here, that are in our everyday life. A person in farming, a person that owns a store, just people in different areas. And then when we found out what their real story was, we interviewed 4 people from World War II. Unfortunately, none of them are with us anymore, but they told their story. It was one of the most inspiring things I've done in the series so far, and I cherish that film for that reason, to get these stories that really open up your heart. And then the last half of that film is about the heroes that were here back in the time of the Civil War, and they were part of a secret underground railroad movement that was here in Fairfield, but we didn't realize that until we did the research. We worked with Rory Goff, and I worked with Lawrence Iyer, who became our director of research for the rest of the films. Been amazing help. Lawrence taught history for 30 years. Really brilliant guy. Yale degree, although I don't hold it against him. But really smart. And he's been invaluable. We usually have about 10 people now with each film that help with history, but it's all coordinated by Lawrence, and I really appreciate him. That Underground Railroad research that was done earned us the Lauren Horton Award from the State Historical Society. And that is a pretty big honor, just to be named with the group of people who won this award for bringing to life history in their local community. So we started winning awards around that time. I wasn't used to that. I wasn't doing it for that reason, but I did notice it got more publicity for the project and therefore more donations, which really helped because it was becoming more and more expensive to produce these films. The first film cost only $40,000. You might think that's a lot for what we did. It was really nothing. But the second film cost over $60,000, and then it's grown. So really is challenging to do a beautiful job. We didn't want to just do an okay job. We wanted something that kids could watch in their classroom. We even broke some of the films up into little pieces that we had in mind from the beginning would be maybe seen in a classroom of 3 to 10 minutes long, so a class could digest it, discuss it. World War II, and we had a group that actually did that, and then got in touch with me via Skype, and we spoke with the class in the Fairfield Middle School. So both private and public schools are showing parts of our films now in their classroom to better understand local history. That excites me.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Those numbers are sticking in my head of how much each movie cost. Can you maybe tell us how you managed to do that? How you financially?
How do we raise that kind of money? We're lucky. We have a community that really supports us. Fairfield, through the Lost grant. Now, Lost doesn't mean that the city council doesn't know where they are at all. They in fact do. They have a local option sales tax, Lost fund, that they decide where those funds go. And I've requested at different times in our production schedule that we might be considered a part of that, and we've gotten a grant for that. That's really been helpful. We work with the state groups that are available for humanities projects, etc. And there's a group called Humanities Iowa out of Iowa City that we've worked with and gotten grants from them. We've also worked with the Greater Jefferson County Foundation, a fabulous group where people who have donated some of their lifelong estates, etc., to something that really preserves history and betters our community. The people on those boards have been very gracious to support this project as we've developed it. I think one of the advantages is we produce the films on time, on budget, and they're pretty good. And I say that not for me, for the team we have. We now have over 100 people who help us develop these. The last group I want to say is our community itself, individuals who write me checks and say, Dick, good job, keep up the good work. And all of a sudden there's $1,000 or $100 or whatever that comes to Fairfield Productions, which is a nonprofit group, so there's at least a little tax advantage. But a lot of people don't do it for that reason. They do it because they want to be a part of it. And we are so happy that they are.
One more thing about Heroes, going back. Wasn't this the first movie you used reenactments in?
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because, you know, these different techniques, we talked about B-roll and narration and so on. And of course the interviews, but reenactments are important. And in that film, we had several reenactments. Two I can remember. One is about Mehedable Woods, where we used what's at the Muslim Barns, horses from some individuals who were really great in supporting us. They had a tourney wagon there at Muslim Barns that we got to use. And we filmed there with, I think, 6 or 8 cameras. There's a lot of cameras, a lot of different angles, and got some beautiful shots of Mehedable Woods as she's leaving Fairfield with goods to bring the troops that are from Jefferson County. She ends up being a real hero of Fairfield in the fact that she was just going to do whatever she could to help, but ended up becoming almost Auntie Woods of a huge group of soldiers. She even took a barge all the way down into the war zones in down south. So really quite an amazing story. And reenactments really help tell that story. The other one, even I think more important in some ways, or more involved in terms of the reenactment, was the derailment on the railway Invisible, the story about what I consider one of the greatest heroes of the Fairfield area, and that's Christian Burkett, who at the age of 10 or 12 years old was an Underground Railroad conductor for his parents, and a very cool kid I would have loved to have met either as a kid or as an adult. He lived a very accomplished life and worked with the state in many substantial roles. But when he came back to Fairfield at an older age, he tells a story which is written beautifully about not just that, oh, I was a conductor on the railway and how great was I, but rather how he screwed up and actually messed up bringing a slave to freedom, a freedom seeker, as we would call him. And in doing so, the guy actually falls off his horse because he's trying to evade these guys who were after him from down south. And as Christian tries to evade with his horse, the guy falls off. We had a huge group, a huge crew. wonderful actors in that, and it ended up being a really valuable. It was really one of the sweet times to do that entire project. One of the little interesting things, and I'll tell you a little inside story here, is we still weren't great at every part of this. I always tell my crew, we don't have to be great, but we got to get better every film. Well, that film, we didn't have a continuity advisor. Continuity advisor means that somebody who says, okay, this person's dressed this way, don't let him put his plaid shirt on later, and because he didn't have time to change, right? So even if you shoot it the next day, he has to wear the same clothes, right? Well, in this case, our young Christian Burkett wore a jacket, and then it got hot during the shooting, and little did we know he had taken off his jacket. So it could have happened during the scene, but unfortunately, when we edited it, we didn't notice until near the end. And what happened was he had his jacket on, then he had it off, and then he had it on again. The changing weather around Fairfield, Iowa, I guess we're going to have to, but it ended up being a funny moment, and certainly not one that most people noticed, but I did. And we ended up, Jason and I ended up getting a good laugh out of that one. You know, I think the thing is there are screw-ups that are going to happen. We try to keep them to a minimum, obviously. But we learn from them, you know, and that's one of the things we're doing. These films are substantial. We started using musicians in that film locally, not just pieces of songs they had done. We actually started recording local musicians. I remember Tom Morgan did some stuff for that film. And Tim Britton, our guy who runs all of our sound, does the recording and the sound engineering and editing. He just does a beautiful job. Said, let's use this guy because Tim knows everybody in the music scene around here. We used, I think, 8 musicians just for that film alone. So, a lot of fun.
So the next film was A Place to Grow. Now, that one was really interesting.
It was a real challenge for me because I didn't know a lot about farming. But I felt like this is a farming community, right?
Right.
This is what it was known for. And I better do something on the history of agriculture here. So I went in blind. I really did. I was like, fortunately, I had the guidance of Lance Foster, who talked to me about the soil. Said, that's, if you're going to study farming, understand the soil better. And that's what made me realize, wait a minute, Native Americans farmed this area even before, white people did. So let's start there, and that's what we did. Native American seed keepers. Lance Foster introduced me to Marissa Mayakonda Cummings from. Actually, she was helping in the understanding of Native American ways, etc., at a college nearby in a. It was outside of Omaha, a little north, but she's part of the Omaha tribe. And she said, you really need to understand about the Native American seed keepers, the women who took these seeds and year after year got better quality seeds, which allowed them to grow better and better corn, which kept the tribe alive all those years. I didn't know anything about that, really, not much. But I found out. We interviewed her through a really interesting group she was working with at the university who was studying video. So I contacted them. I said, can we do it in your studio remotely, and I'll be on an iPad and do the interview? They said, yes, we'd love to be a part of that. So all of a sudden you're getting more and more people involved in this thing. It becomes so interesting, and that's kind of how we started, about the soil. We did an amazing shot in the beginning of that film that gives people this concept of, we used a drone to go right down to base through fog to the soil. And then we start talking about the soil. We worked with soil experts. We discussed everything from the earliest Native American seed keepers and then the earliest European settlers in this area who couldn't barely survive. If they had a bad crop the first year, their family died. There wasn't any Hy-Vee to go to, you know? It was that. It was just that. It was whatever they could do. Especially if it got towards the winter, they couldn't travel all the way back to Burlington to get goods. That's a long trek. And there's no roads, there's no nothing. So it's a pretty amazing time to really go into. And we used the Bonneville cabin to do a reenactment there about one story that we had read about that was really fascinating. How one neighbor went without food just to help another family get by through the winter. So we went all the way from there to modern day. And modern day, not just, we included everything from sustainable agriculture to the highest production yields possible that people were getting in Jefferson County that year. And we actually got welcomed. I remember one time I asked Jason to take a shot of a farmer who was getting started early, you know. So I said, I just pulled over on Salina Blacktop and I said, Jason, go ahead and get this shot. He goes, well, we don't have permission. I said, well, you're on Salina Blacktop. You're not on their property. Take the shot from there. So Jason, God bless him, you know, he works with me, he's very patient with me, and he starts taking the shot, and of course, the farmer starts walking right over. So I get out, you know, kind of clumsily like I do it these days, and I said, because I don't want Jason to get, you know, yelled at, and I said, hi, and he goes, hey, can I help you? And by the way, I found out that farmer talk, can I help you, doesn't always mean, can I help you? It means, what the hell are you doing on my property? Taking video of my operation. Well, thank God it was Gary Adam. And Gary, I said, hi, I'm Dick DeAngelis. I'm with the Fairfield, you know, I'm trying to give my Fairfield history series. And he goes, hey, Dick, Gary Adam. He goes, my wife and I, we watched your movie. It's fabulous. I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm sure glad it was good enough that he liked it. And he said, oh, I'd be glad to show you around. And he opened up, showed, as well as other farmers, said, okay, because I told them, listen, I really know nothing. And they go, okay, well, I learned right away, don't ask a guy how many acres you're farming. Because that's like asking him how much money he makes, right? I didn't realize that. Oh, how many acres you got here, you know? And they go, hey, you don't really want to ask that. So, okay, note to self. You know, by the time we're done, we start like learning how to talk to people a little more intelligently in that area. We learned a lot. I still don't know a lot compared to a farmer, but I know they work hard. I know they're a good bunch of people. No matter what kind of farming they do, they work really hard. They get up with the sun and they do their job as long as it takes to do it. And I'm impressed by that. Generally, they're also a patriotic bunch. And so there's one part of the film that I think I like the most. I've seen a YouTube video by a local musician, Marianne Eagleson. She did a version with her guitar of America the Beautiful. And I had the idea for the end of the film using that. And we did, and it meant a lot to me.
Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of gray, for purple mountains, majesty America, America. God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
That was really beautiful. Music plays a huge part, it seems, in all these movies, really.
Yeah, it became more and more so. I realized that the music sets the tone for the films. Tim helped a lot and ended up becoming one of the really fun parts to use our local talent. Or it's once in a while as a person who was from here, maybe left, but they still really had Fairfield in their heart. And so I remember one, in that film, we had done a number of interviews with people who they actually farmed or were part of farming during a time before there were even tractors and sometimes before electricity. So they gave such an insight into those early parts of farming, right? I mean, gosh, can you imagine? And one of the guys' names was Roy Rogers. And his story was awesome. This is a part of the film. But I had to ask him, I said, Roy, do you sing? You know, because get a name like Roy Rogers. And he goes, yeah, but I do sing. He goes, and older guy, probably, I'm guessing at the time, I don't remember, but I think around 90, so on. I said, well, can you sing me something like Home on the Range or something like that? And so he did. And we ended up using it in the film. Tim put a little bit of guitar behind it. He was mad at me that I didn't give the guy a pitch, so that he kind of varied his pitch, which made it hard to put the guitar with it, but Tim made it work. And we had that really fun, sweet thing. At the end of him singing, he goes, is that what you wanted? Yeah. And I said, yeah, that's perfect.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all the day. Is that the one?
So anyway, we had really wonderful, again, that kind of kismet or whatever you want to call it, divine providence happened throughout that film. Plus some gorgeous shots that were done. Now, not only did we use our key person in doing the drone work, Renee, but we used 2 or 3 other drone operators as well to kind of give us this rich feeling of like going over cornfields or seeing operations, from above, and you see a machine come through. It was really wild stuff. And we won a bunch of awards for the work that we did in that film. It was well worth it. Our people really came through in a huge way. And Jason would do anything he had to do to get a shot. Even once I think he laid down not knowingly, but in a field of, I think, wild parsnip or something, and got all kinds of, he itched for, I think, 2 weeks, but he got the shot. And that was always one time I think I have him, he's in a bucket at the Adam Farms, and this is the Adam brothers, and and they put him in the bucket, and he got the shot. They lifted him up, and then he takes a shot. It was so awesome. He'd go through anything to get the shot, and that was the fun we had. There was even one we used a high technology shot. So Sam Lieb from DLF TV, he came and did this. I said, I really want to try to do a time-lapse shot, but I want to do one at night. What do you think? He goes, I'm in. That'd be great. So he had to get really high in his shot because the Adam brothers told me they were going to be harvesting before a storm came at around 2 a.m. So real quick, we had to get out there, and they had already put together hay bales stacked up so that Sam could climb up on top of the hay bale and way high take the shot we needed to take. It was so awesome. They were so helpful, and it made the difference. The shot ended up being really cool, really interesting. That was a good movie. It meant a lot to me to lay out the story. I think as time goes on, that particular film is going to stand the test of time. It'll actually be a snapshot of what agriculture was like in Jefferson County in the past and up to that moment. It really could be, I think, something really special. I think it had the most heart of any of the films I had. But it was a really sweet film, I thought, for a history film.
So Ahead of Their Time was a little bit different.
Ahead of Their Time was interesting because, kind of like Heroes, I wanted to tell little mini stories of people whose thinking was different than everybody else's. You know, kind of, you think of Elon Musk or something when he's doing some of the things he does, you know, SpaceX and all this. It's like, well, how did he get that idea? He looks like he's thinking in a different time zone than the rest of us, right? Well, who was like that in Fairfield, you know? Sometimes it was an inventor, like the typical ones that we have in our minds is Loudon and Turney, really fabulous stories. But sometimes it was somebody like Dr. Keck, Dr. Mrs. Keck, a woman who actually dispensed natural remedies in bottles from Fairfield, but they weren't snake oil like a lot of the stuff then, and they weren't poison like some of the stuff even that was considered medicine. It's kind of a tough time to get healthy if you're sick. But she did some really good work and eventually left Fairfield with a dispute with some people, some of the men here who didn't like her having the success she was having, and ended up forming a wonderful, huge clinic. I think it's in Dubuque, if I'm not mistaken, but it's up the river and served the entire Mississippi River communities all the way down. Had thousands and thousands of clients, became a millionaire. Just amazing story of Mrs. Keck. And we got a hold of her great-granddaughter who ended up helping tell the story, who came to Fairfield. She had written a book and ended up really, really helping a lot. We did everything we could to tell all the stories. Of course, we always started where I tried to start a lot of the history film. We started with the Native Americans. In this case, I didn't want to go with the Iowa or the Meskwaki, which we had talked about. I went even earlier. There was a group that lived around this area in Jefferson County, but met about an hour northeast of here in Iowa. It was called the Hopewell people, or the Hopewell contingent. And what was kind of cool about Hopewell, you know them for their arrow points, by the way. They're absolutely beautiful. They were an artistic, an advanced society. They had people come from all over the continent to this part of Iowa almost like you would see in Lourdes or someplace like that, to offer tooth of shark from the Gulf of Mexico, and you see another piece of a certain stone that only is from the Rocky Mountains. You see all these things buried in certain areas where they had their ceremonies on a higher plateau overlooking a river. Really fascinating artwork, necklaces, and everything from the Hopewell. So we tried to tell those stories. In order to tell it, we actually interviewed a guy who was a former head of archaeology in Iowa, and now was living in Wisconsin. And God bless Jason, he took a trip all the way out there, met with the guy, and we did a remote interview. It was fabulous. And that gave us the insight into the Hopewell people that we needed in order to tell the story of the people who walked in these areas 1,000+ years ago, and a little bit about who they were, that they were pretty advanced. Kind of interesting stuff.
The fact that all of them would meet here
Yeah.
in Iowa from all over. Just think, like you said, no cars, no buses, no.
Right. And we don't know anything about it. Only a few people. And we tried to tell that story. I think it's the beginning of that story. It's really something special. We had many more stories. We had the help of people like Mark Schaefer from the, Mark was a dual purpose helper. Mark's no longer with us, but his input and help still goes through in each of the films that we're doing. And Mark, who was at the Carnegie Museum, was also a great artist. So he helped in a number of times where I needed to kind of depict what was going on, and I didn't have a picture that was worth anything. One of those was the light tower that we actually showed was one of the earliest municipal lighting systems in the country, and it was right here in Fairfield, Iowa. Mark not only took something he had already done, but he actually redid it. I gave him some research that helped him put a new light into the work that he had already done, and he redid it, and it came out so beautiful. Later on, he said to me, "Dick DeAngelis, I'm so appreciative of what you did that I drew you into the picture." And you see this chubby guy in a suit and a tie walking under the light tower. He goes, "That's you." So I'm thinking of Mark. He not only was a mentor to me, but more importantly, he was a mentor to our director of photography, Jason Strong, because he taught him art at high school, and meant a lot to Jason, I know, and Jason kind of taught me a lot about Mark and his own quirky nature. Mark introduced me to Herb, his brother, who helped us in the second film with our research on the Iowa band and all kinds of things like that. So there are all these connections that start forming with all the people who helped in different films. Now they help and they go, "By the way, I know this film. It's remarkable. You have to help Dick whatever way you can." And so we got somebody else that helped us, and that's how things kind of grew from there.
I noticed you didn't use modern day people. Was there why is that?
I wanted to. I even interviewed people like Pete Nelson, who's a great industrialist from Fairfield, and I learned a lot about industry here. But I realized that there is a certain kind of cutoff where I feel like something is easier for me to explain to people because you have some time distance. It's not happening right now. I can think something I'm doing is great. It's innovative. It's going to go down in history. And you might not even know about it 30 years from now. And that's just the way it is. That's the way time is. So time gives perspective. And that's why most of the stories are from 1900 and before. Some of them kind of creep into the early 1900s, but that's about it. The only difference was the history of agriculture, because I wanted to do the entire thing as best I could up until the present. But all the other films, including Ahead of Their Time, Heroes, etc., are from way back before, at least 100 years ago.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about Fairfield's history, you have to bring in education.
Yeah.
And thus Parsons.
Yeah, now we're getting to the tough stuff, If you mention Parsons or Maharishi University, any of the colleges that have been here, you usually get different opinions, and sometimes pretty vocal opinions. So how the heck am I going to wade through those waters? And the way I felt like I could wade through them is as a historian, or at least a wannabe historian. I wanted to understand Parsons, not just when I came here in 75 and I said, oh yeah, it's Dropout U and it went out of business. That's all I heard. So I realized as I started doing investigating, everyone knew a different story. Some people knew it as the greatest school and the amazing ideas. Some people remember what it was and that MIU came and ruined it. Some people knew MIU and said, I don't know what that was before, but I know what it is now. It's a really cool school, right? So I'm like, okay, well, forget the Maharishi part right now. Let's just focus on Parsons. It lived a 98-year life. Now, my mom at the time was 99 years old, and during that move, she passed away. And as I looked at her life, I thought, boy, she lived such a interesting life. And her life as a kid was very different than her life as a young mom, very different than, different parts of her life. Like really different. But it all made up one big picture, right? So like that, I said, okay, let's find out about Parsons' life. Let's treat Parsons like a person and find out, why did it get started? What happened? And we brought in experts, John Launius, who wrote a book about the Parsons family that came from. And then we started delving into it. We interviewed 4 people who were in the 100-year-old and above class, right? Some of whom actually attended Parsons in the 1930s, 38, 39, so on. So we got a whole look at Parsons from a different perspective than what happened in the 50s, 60s, early 70s. And we told the whole story from beginning to end. And we used music more than ever to tell that story. In the beginning, we had a fellow who had lived here in Fairfield, moved, Tommy Boynton, who was a wonderful guy, from before freshman, actually, that talented of a jazz musician. And I asked him if he would do this, ragtime thing, Joplin ragtime. But not just Joplin ragtime, but early Joplin that people hadn't heard of. And he goes, I'd love to learn it. So he did on his own through thick and thin, because he was doing a lot of things at the time. And he recorded that song, which made it into the film. That's how we get our music, a very interesting blend of music. But at a certain time in the history, and we actually found out things like people didn't even local Parsons historians, I would call them, like a guy like Dave Neff, who was invaluable in understanding what was going on with Parsons, and John Blackstock. They didn't know that in 1950 time period, Parsons actually went bankrupt. And it was like, yeah, I was teaching them something now, which was fun, because they were certainly teaching me a lot. And we digitized old films that we had of Parsons football games and so on. We found things in that film box that you wouldn't believe. And it was fun, because we were actually delving into history that way. And we understood more about Parsons as we started understanding the nuances. You know what I found out? There's somebody who knows a lot about the 60s, but he knew very little about the 50s. Some people who went just during the last 2 years, their experience with Parsons was a sad one. Whereas a person who went in the late 60s, in many cases, they were really juiced about going to Parsons, the innovative ideas that they were using and so on. So what happened was there's a guy named Dr. Millard Roberts who gets hired in 55, and he kind of turns Parsons around, if you will. It's struggling with an attendance of 300, and in his 10 years about, he turns it into a group of over 5,000 students in a short period of time. He hits the scene in the mid-50s, just about the time rock and roll hits the scene in America. 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock rock, just kind of like that. Well, I couldn't afford to pay for all the music from the 50s and 60s. Sometimes it's $5,000, $10,000 a song. So I used a local musician who is extremely talented, Jimmy Ryan. And Jimmy actually wrote music in the style of the 50s and 60s, but his own music. And that music is what we recorded with Tim's help and Jimmy's help and put into this film. And it's amazing, the energy that's in the film for that part when Roberts comes to town, right? So we've won all kinds of awards for our soundtrack and music already for Parsons, and it continues to win. It's the awards, get selected to big film festivals, like one in Austria recently, the International History Film Festival. It's just so much fun to be recognized for the work that you're putting into this. Not for me, but for my team, who works really hard. I mean, I've mentioned some of the people. Werner Elmker helps us a lot. Jason has been a stronghold, been with me there. Amin Kader helps edit a couple of the films. He's going to edit the next film that we're doing about Maharishi, when Maharishi came to town. And he also edited Heroes. I think Werner Elmker has been just wonderful. Tim Britton has been great. And then we have a whole group of assistant directors, people who assist me, and that is a tough job because I'm a pain in the neck sometimes. I'm friendly, I'm nice, I'm fun, but I'm big and I have a hard time getting around, so I'm sending someone to do everything for me that they can do, and I've had a great group of people doing that, including you, who have been with me for the last 3 years. I really appreciate you and all the other people that we've had, from Katie Roberts and Aisha Ferdine and Nikki. She's just great. And I know I'm missing some, I'm sorry, but just a good group. When people sometimes get a request for me to send them a check, I'll say, oh yeah, I'll have Ariel come pick that up, figuring that they would maybe be likely to give a bigger check to Ariel than to me. But anyway, we're learning a lot too. We learn a lot together. And you know this. I mean, I don't want to interview you, but you know a lot more about history now, don't you?
Yes, you have turned me into a history nerd, but I like it.
How about when you drive the history truck, the Suburban around? What happens then?
Yes, you were kind enough to loan me your business truck the other day, and I think it was 15 people stopped me. And so I realized two things. I know the Fairfield History series pretty well, and business cards are always good to have on you.
And what are they asking you? Like, when's the next one coming out?
When's the next one? What's that one in the Heroes that, this happened? Oh, are those floors in Cafe P the real floors? Those are the real, yeah.
I know, it's so nice. And people are excited. They're juiced about local history. And they stop me all the time and want to know about something that was in one of the films, or how can they watch it again. And we now put all that information on our website. www.fairfieldhistoryseries.com. And it's easy for people to remember. And then they can go there, they can buy DVDs as gifts. They can buy even online, they can just rent it or purchase it as a digital copy. It's really great. We're really pleased with it. Jason helps us with that website as well. And I don't know, it's just a way for people to kind of celebrate. And we also tell them like what we're working on too, so it's nice.
So I know that you wanted to tell me about the Honey War, which was a quirky little story. I thought maybe we could end with that.
Yeah, no, that'd probably be a good way, because it kind of gives you an idea of something that we thought would be a nice little fun idea. There's a story about a war that really didn't happen over some honey early on in Iowa's history that happened just 20 minutes away from Fairfield, like south of here, down towards Keosauqua area, and on the border of Missouri, and then kind of bled into it. And it was really a funny and interesting story about how, some trees were chopped down with honey in them, and ended up, getting two militias ready to fight each other. The fight didn't happen, but we kept on. I saw some place online where they were trying to tell the story in a almost cartoonish way. And I thought, hey, wait a minute, we could tell this, because I wanted to tell the story, but I wanted to tell it like a cartoon. Well, there's a lady that's here named Bonita Versh. She worked on the Rugrats, and she worked even before that on some of the earliest stuff. And now she's here, retired in Fairfield, Iowa. You wouldn't even know it, right? So I asked her if she would come, and I thought, oh, this will be fun. She can do some drawings. We'll just digitize them, and it'll be easy to do a fun story, and I'll narrate it. This became, I think, I probably used a third of our resources and time to do this 1 2-minute section of the film. But it was fun. It was so much fun. And that's what happened. Bonita came, she wanted it this way. Let's see. And then we found out that, we can have somebody who could do it, digitized the digital way very easily with a pen and on the computer. But to do it the old-fashioned way and then to digitize it, a little more tricky. And we did it. And Jason worked very closely with her. We also had another fella, Phil Rabelais, who worked. And by the time we were done, we then used some music from some of the U.S. kind of cavalry-like music to it was fun. Then we did sound effects. And we hadn't done what they call Foley work, in a Foley studio, but we did it right here in my office in the studio. And we were like, hey. At one point, the crowd that had gathered for Iowa was so, up in arms, and we had them, up in arms, hey, yeah, with all these voices, right? And then you hear one voice say, "Go Hawks!" That's me. I sometimes throw things into the movies. You barely hear it, but that's the director kind of getting silly. By the time we're done, Honey Ward probably won more awards for short films than almost any of our other things. And it's just a funny way of looking at history in an interesting, very short little segment. I have so much fun doing this and bringing this to our town. We have 3 films left when Marshy came to town, which we're working on right now. Then a movie about the history of artists and musicians and their impact on history in this area. And then the last one, we have something to do with the future of Fairfield. And that's where we'll finish. I'm honored to bring this to our community. I wouldn't have thought at this my age that I'd be able to do something totally different, learn a whole new field, and have it recognized by have our town recognized for its commitment to history. That's what excites me. We're an amazing town. We have so much talent. Everyone's doing their own thing. A beautification committee does this. Our city council's amazing. But everyone does different things. Jason runs the Fairfield Media Center, which is all about video going on in and around Fairfield. There's amazing stuff going on. This is just one little thing. But I hope somebody takes what I've done and builds on it, creates more from it. Because I think that a town that understands where it comes from, a town that understands its beginnings, a town that understands the people who've lived here, those people in that town are richer for that understanding. And it says something about your town when you put the resources towards understanding that. It says, wow, this town values its history. It values its identity. And I think that'll encourage more people to come to our wonderful town. I sure hope so. Hey, thanks for taking a little time.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. And I know I can speak for myself when I say I'm grateful for the movies, and probably most of the townspeople as well. So,
well, it's the end product, but it's also the process that I always tell people, make sure we enjoy the process, because it's not only the goal, but sometimes it's the path, right?
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Right.